In the winter of 550 BC, a Babylonian spy master stood in the throne room of King Nabonidus holding a dispatch that would make no sense for another 2,000 years. The message was simple. The Persians had overthrown their Median overlords. A new king sat on the throne in Anshan. His name was Cyrus. Nabonidus laughed. The Persians were nobodies, tribute-paying vassals who herded goats in the mountains. They had no army worth fearing. They had no history of conquest. But what the spy master didn't tell his king, because he didn't yet understand it himself, was that this mountain shepherd was about to invent a completely new form of power. He was about to build the first empire that didn't rule through terror, but through an idea. And that idea would outlive every sword ever forged. To understand what Cyrus did, you need to see what the world looked like before he arrived. The ancient Near East in the 6th century BC was a blood-soaked nightmare. Empires rose and fell with monotonous brutality. The Assyrians had perfected the art of making people obey through sheer horror. When they conquered a city, they didn't just take it. They skinned the leaders alive. They impaled civilians on stakes outside the city gates. They deported entire populations and scattered them across the empire so they could never unite again. The message was clear. Resist and we will erase you from history. This wasn't cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was policy. The Assyrians understood that controlling a vast territory required making rebellion unthinkable. Fear was the currency of power. After the Assyrians came the Babylonians under Nebuchadnezzar. He was slightly less sadistic, but only slightly. When Jerusalem rebelled, he burned the temple, destroyed the city, and dragged the entire Jewish population to Babylon in chains. This was normal. This was how empires worked. Then came Cyrus, and he looked at this system and did something no conqueror had ever done. He said no. Cyrus was born around 600 BC in Persis, a backwater region in what is now southern Iran. His people, the Persians, were subjects of the Medes, a more powerful Iranian tribe that controlled the plateau. The Medes themselves were vassals of larger powers. It was a world of hierarchies within hierarchies. Everyone bowed to someone. But Cyrus had a vision that went beyond the typical ambitions of a tribal chief. He didn't just want to move up one rung on the ladder. He wanted to burn the ladder. In 553 BC, he revolted against his Median overlord, King Astyages. The war should have been a slaughter. The Medes had a professional army, the Persians were farmers and shepherds, but Cyrus had something more valuable than soldiers. He had a talent for persuasion. He convinced half the Median army to defect. Not through bribes, but through a simple pitch. Follow me and I will treat you as equals. Follow me and you will not be subjects but partners. It worked. The Median generals switched sides. Astyages was captured, and instead of executing him, Cyrus gave him a comfortable retirement. This was unheard of. You didn't spare the king you defeated. You displayed his head on a pike. But Cyrus understood that mercy was a weapon sharper than bronze. Every soldier who heard that story thought the same thing. Maybe this man is different. With the Medes absorbed into his coalition, Cyrus turned his attention west. The kingdom of Lydia in modern-day Turkey was rich. It was the place where coinage had been invented. King Croesus of Lydia was so wealthy his name became a byword for fortune. Croesus made a fatal mistake. He consulted the oracle at Delphi and asked if he should attack Persia. The oracle said, "If you cross the river, a great empire will fall." Croesus assumed it meant the Persian Empire. It didn't. The war was hard fought, but Cyrus won through innovation. The Lydians had cavalry that was the best in the world. Cyrus couldn't match them horse for horse, so he didn't try. He placed camels at the front of his army. Horses hate the smell of camels, they panic. The Lydian cavalry broke and fled. Croesus retreated to his capital, Sardis, expecting a siege that would last years. Cyrus took the city in 2 weeks by sending climbers up a cliff everyone thought was unscalable. Now came the test. Croesus was captured. Herodotus tells us that Cyrus ordered him burned alive. The pyre was lit. But at the last moment, Cyrus changed his mind. He ordered the fire put out. Croesus was spared. He became an advisor at the Persian court. Once again, Cyrus had refused to follow the script. He had taken the wealthiest king in the West and turned him into a propaganda asset. Every city that heard this story learned the lesson. Surrender to Cyrus and you will live. Resist the Assyrians and you die screaming. The choice was obvious, but the real test was Babylon. This was the big one. Babylon was the New York of the ancient world. It was the center of trade, culture, and religion. Its walls were so thick that chariots could race on top of them. It had survived sieges that lasted decades. The Babylonian king, Nabonidus, was paranoid and unpopular. He had alienated the priesthood by favoring a moon god over Marduk, the city's patron deity. The people hated him, but the city was still impregnable. Cyrus didn't storm the walls. He outthought them. In 539 BC, his engineers diverted the Euphrates River, which ran under the city walls. The water level dropped. Persian troops waded through the riverbed and entered the city at night. There was no battle. There was no sack. The gates opened. And when Cyrus entered Babylon, he didn't come as a destroyer. He came as a liberator. He went to the temple of Marduk and made offerings. He declared himself the chosen one of the god. He restored the statues that Nabonidus had removed. He cut taxes. He released political prisoners. And then he did something that echoed through history. He freed the Jews. The Jewish people had been captives in Babylon for nearly 50 years. They were skilled laborers, scribes, and administrators. They were valuable. Any other conqueror would have kept them. Cyrus let them go. He funded the rebuilding of their temple in Jerusalem. He returned the sacred vessels that Nebuchadnezzar had stolen. He told them to go home. Why? He didn't worship their God. He wasn't Jewish. The answer is that Cyrus had figured out something profound. Loyalty bought with gratitude lasts longer than loyalty enforced by fear. The Jews never forgot what he did. In their scriptures, Cyrus is the only non-Jewish king ever called a Messiah, an anointed one of God. That's the power of mercy weaponized. The Cyrus Cylinder, a clay document discovered in Babylon, lays out his philosophy. It's written in Akkadian, the language of Mesopotamia. It declares that he came to Babylon in peace. It says that he restored religious freedom. It claims that he ruled with justice. Scholars debate how much of it is propaganda, but here's what matters. Even if it was propaganda, it was a new kind of propaganda. For the first time in history, a conqueror was bragging not about how many people he killed, but how many he set free. This wasn't softness, it was a strategy. Cyrus had invented a new form of imperialism. Instead of breaking a people's will, he absorbed their identity. He let conquered nations keep their gods, their laws, their local rulers. All he asked was tribute and loyalty. The result was an empire that didn't have to garrison every city with troops. The subjects policed themselves because they didn't feel conquered. They felt included. But there was a problem. This system required Cyrus to keep expanding. Every time he showed mercy to a defeated king, he raised expectations. If he ever reverted to the old ways, if he ever massacred a city, the entire illusion would collapse. He had built an empire on trust, and trust is fragile. So he kept moving, east toward the steppes. That's where the story gets darker. The steppes were nothing like the fertile valleys Cyrus had conquered. They stretched endlessly, flat and dry, broken only by wind-carved ridges and salt flats. This was the domain of the Masajte, a nomadic people who lived on horseback. They didn't build cities, they didn't farm. They moved with the seasons following the grass. Their wealth was measured in horses and cattle, and their warriors were born in the saddle. The Masajte were ruled by a queen named Tamiris. She was a widow. Her husband had died in battle, and she had taken command of the tribes. Ancient historians describe her as fierce, intelligent, and unimpressed by the reputation of the Persian king. When Cyrus sent ambassadors demanding her submission, she refused. He tried a different approach. He proposed marriage. It was a transparent ploy. If she accepted, he would absorb her kingdom through alliance. If she refused, he had a pretext for war. Tamiris saw through it immediately. She sent back a message. "Rule your own people, king of Persia, and let me rule mine, but you won't take this advice. You're not interested in peace, you want conquest." She was right. Cyrus marched his army east. The terrain favored the nomads. The Persians were infantry, trained to fight in formation. The Masajte were light cavalry, masters of the hit and run. They could shoot arrows from horseback at full gallop. They could appear from nowhere, strike, and vanish into the grasslands. Cyrus couldn't catch them. So he set a trap. He ordered his army to set up camp near the frontier and then retreat, leaving behind tents, supplies, and most importantly, wine. The Persians drank wine, the Masajte didn't. They drank fermented mare's milk, which was far less potent. Cyrus was counting on their curiosity. A detachment of Masajte warriors led by Tamiris's son Spargapeses discovered the abandoned camp. They saw no enemy. They saw food, treasure, and strange liquid in clay jars. They drank. The wine hit them like a hammer. They had no tolerance for it. They got drunk, reckless, loud. And while they were incapacitated, the Persians returned. It was a massacre. Spargapeses was captured along with most of his men. When Tamiris heard what had happened, her grief turned to rage. She sent Cyrus a message, and this one was carved into history. "You bloodthirsty man, don't be so proud of this victory. You didn't defeat my son with courage. You tricked him with wine, a poison your people use to make fools of themselves. Give me back my son and leave my land, and I'll let you go. Refuse, and I swear by the sun I will give you your fill of blood." Cyrus ignored the warning. He had won too many times to believe he could lose, but Spargapeses, humiliated by his capture, refused to live as a prisoner. The moment his guards loosened his bonds, he killed himself. When Tamiris learned her son was dead, something inside her broke. She wasn't fighting for territory anymore. This was personal. She gathered every warrior from every tribe under her command. She sent word to the clans in the far mountains and the deep plains. This wasn't just a battle. It was vengeance. The two armies met on the open steppe. Ancient sources say it was the most brutal battle of the age. There were no tactics, no clever maneuvers. It was a grinding, bloody melee. The Persians fought with discipline. The Massagetae fought with fury. For hours, neither side gained ground. Then the Persian center broke. The Massagetae cavalry smashed through the line. The Persians tried to regroup, but the nomads were everywhere, cutting down officers, isolating units. Cyrus, now an old man, fought in the thick of it. He refused to retreat. And somewhere in that chaos, surrounded by dying men and screaming horses, the king, who had never lost a war, was killed. The Persians were annihilated. When the dust settled, Tomyris walked among the corpses, searching. She found Cyrus's body. What happened next depends on which historian you believe. Herodotus, writing a century later, says she ordered a wineskin filled with human blood. She took Cyrus's severed head and shoved it into the skin, saying, "I warned you I would give you your fill of blood. Now drink." It's a story so vivid, so theatrical, that some scholars think it's too perfect to be true. But whether it happened exactly that way or not, the message is clear. Cyrus, the king of mercy, the liberator, the man who rewrote the rules of conquest, died because he underestimated someone who had nothing left to lose. His body was never recovered by the Persians. There was no grand funeral in Pasargadae, no procession. The empire he built survived, but the man who built it vanished into the steppe. His son Cambyses took the throne and immediately faced rebellions. Without Cyrus's touch, the empire became brittle. Cambyses was paranoid, brutal, everything his father wasn't. The system Cyrus designed only worked if the man at the top had his wisdom. Remove that and the whole thing teetered. But the legend didn't die. 2 centuries later, Alexander the Great visited Cyrus's tomb in Pasargadae. He ordered it restored and left an inscription honoring the king. When the Achaemenid Empire finally fell, it wasn't because of internal collapse. It took Alexander, the greatest general in history, to break it. That's the legacy Cyrus left. An empire so well designed it took a genius to destroy it. The Cyrus cylinder ended up buried in the ruins of Babylon, forgotten for 25 centuries. British archaeologists dug it up in 1879. When they translated it, they realized what they had. Some called it the first declaration of human rights. Others said that was overreach, that it was just propaganda. But here's the thing. Even propaganda reveals what a society values. The fact that Cyrus felt the need to boast about mercy means mercy had power. He understood that fear alone couldn't hold an empire together. You needed buy-in. You needed people to believe the system worked for them. That's why his model outlasted the Assyrians, the Babylonians, and every other empire that relied on terror. Tomyris disappeared from history after the battle. No one knows how she died or where she's buried, but she's remembered because she's the only person who ever beat Cyrus. She didn't outthink him. She outsuffered him. She had less to lose, so she fought harder. That's the hidden edge in any conflict. Desperation beats strategy when strategy runs out of room. Cyrus spent his entire life building something that would last. And it did. Just not for him. The Persian Empire went on for another 200 years. It became the model every conqueror studied. Alexander copied it. Rome borrowed from it. Even the Mongols, 1,000 years later, understood that you can't rule the world by burning it down. Cyrus proved something that still matters. Power isn't just about who has the sharpest sword. It's about who people choose to follow. The Assyrians had better weapons. The Babylonians had thicker walls. But Cyrus had an idea that made people want to be part of what he was building. He died badly, alone, in the dust, far from home. But the thing he created outlived every king who tried to destroy it. That's the paradox. The man who showed mercy was killed without it. The empire built on trust collapsed when trust ran out. But the idea that you can rule without terror, that survived. 2,500 years later, we're still arguing about what the Cyrus cylinder means. Still debating whether he was a propagandist or a visionary. Maybe he was both. Maybe that's the point. He understood that the story you tell about power matters as much as the power itself. Tomyris got her revenge, but Cyrus got immortality. You decide which one won.